I would like to now please welcome to the stage Hillary Myers. Hillary's one of our directors, and she's going to introduce the next session. Hillary?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. That's a tough act to follow, but this is the panel to do it. And I'm excited for just the framework and the discussion that's already been laid this morning, because now it's an opportunity to dive into talking about Minnesota's role in global food systems, climate change, and food security. As mentioned, my name is Hillary Myers. I've held a variety of roles at Cargill, and today I trade low carbon intensity feedstocks into the renewable fuel space, in addition to having the honor of serving on the AgriGrowth Board of Directors. Cargill is proud to be part of the Twin Cities and Minnesota community, with a rich history in the region and thousands of employees who have built their lives in Minnesota. We're a global company, but our roots in Minnesota remain strong. Cargill helps the world's food system work for you and everyone you know. We connect farmers with markets, customers with ingredients, and families with daily essentials, from the food they eat to the floors they walk on. Our 155,000 team members around the world innovate with purpose, empowering our partners and communities as we work to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. From feed that reduces methane emissions to waste-based renewable fuels, the possibilities are boundless, but our values remain the same. We put people first, we reach higher, we do the right thing. It's how we've met the needs of the people we call neighbors and the planet we call home for 158 years, and how we'll do so for generations to come, even as the world around us continues to change. Cargill is honored to sponsor today's panel to talk about Minnesota's role in food systems and climate change. It's my privilege to turn things over to fellow AgriGrowth Director Pat Lunemann to facilitate this discussion.
Thank you, Hillary. It is indeed my pleasure today to be with you to have this panel. So I'm a dairy farmer by trade. I've been that my whole life. And I've also been an AgriGrowth Director for many years, past chair. So this is a very comfortable setting for me here today. Later on in the program, it'll be the same as you had with Jacob Shapiro. There will be questions that you can ask, and do that through the voice hive method, and have those ready as we go through our discussion here today. So it is my privilege to introduce to you Liz Hunt and Ty Ullmann. So Liz is the head of sustainable and responsible business at Syngenta. She has nearly 10 years of working for the company, doing the sustainability work and working with farmers and leading co-workers in a team effort. Liz started in a greenhouse as a teenager and developed a love for flowers. And she took that love for flowers and got her bachelor's degree in horticulture and business management, and then just moved through the ranks and got into the sustainability mode. Fun fact about Liz is that she is an ultra-marathon runner. So if you think you can outlast her today, I think you're wrong. So Ty Ullmann is the Global Sustainability Director for Cargill. She spent 5.5 years working there in sustainability. Prior to that, she worked in Land O'Lakes, and in the same role in sustainability. I read about Ty that she actually is the person that's responsible for the dairy sustainability program at Land O'Lakes. Ty was just out of college and pulled all of that together. And I'm privileged to say that Ty has been on my farm working with me on our dairy sustainability project. So to have Ty with me on stage here today is a reunion of sorts, and I'm just honored to be with you, Ty, and you, Liz. Thank you. So I'm going to start out with you, Liz, with our first question. If you would share with us your sustainability role at Syngenta, the challenges you see agriculture facing, and the vision that you and your team have to work toward a resilient and sustainable food system. Liz?
Yeah, so at Syngenta, I lead our sustainable and responsible business team, which I like to describe as somewhat of the intersection of corporate responsibility, sustainability commitments, but also commercial, and how do we bring sustainability solutions to life with farmers on the ground. So kind of taking more of a practical approach to sustainability. Our team's responsible kind of in a few key areas for the organization. One is we work really closely with our digital ag team to make sure that we're helping farmers who are keeping records. How can they use that information to not only understand their ROI on the fields, but how can they also look at that information through a context of sustainability? So understanding, some of the different drivers around soil health or water use, carbon, et cetera. We also do a lot of work with different organizations, whether that's activating partnerships on the ground to bring more practices to the field level with farmers, whether that's around pollinator habitats or soil health practices, things like that, and also work with a number of different standards and metrics bodies who are looking at how are you going to measure sustainability on farm, but bringing the lens of science, because Syngenta is a science-based company, but also bringing kind of that practical aspect to it. How will these work for farmers? How will they work for agribusiness? And making sure everything has that kind of flair or consideration to it. And one of the most fun parts is kind of the last area that we work in, and that's working with our commercial team to identify how can products help to enable sustainability practices on farm as well. As far as challenges, I think we heard there's a lot of challenges going on in this space in the last segment. But I think one of the big challenges is how to bring down some of these like global commitments and global challenges, and how do you distill them down to a practical, what can you do now approach kind of across the ag landscape.
Okay.
I think I answered everything there.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Ty, would you share with us your role at Cargill and the headwinds the company is facing and what farmers are facing on sustainability and just your vision within Cargill for a resilient food system?
Yeah,
So
totally.
please share.
So I think very similar to what you've already shared before, but as we think about the sustainability challenges that we're facing, a lot of what we're focused on is how to take these really big, ambitious issues and big, ambitious goals that we have and start to translate that into different contexts. And so I think what we've really been focused on is how can you take a regional approach to a lot of these big challenges in a way that's practical and starts at the farm level. And so a lot of what we've been working on is building different programs and partnerships that can really drive the progress that we need to see in a way that is increasing the resiliency of the food system and bringing different partners along the supply chain together.
Okay, thank you, Ty. Liz, what do you see as the global crop production challenges that we face? And I'm talking about climate change, disease factors. I mean, as we have we become more global, some of those diseases seem to transport themselves. And how does that point to the need for a resilient food system? And specifically, how do we deal with that here in North America and the upper Midwest?
Yeah, so I think every one of us can look around year after year and see some of the weather extremes that are happening. I mean, there's always been drought seasons. There's always been big rainfall events. But the frequency of some of those weather extremes is more and more across the landscape and across the country, right? So if we focus in, on Minnesota, there's been extreme flooding in parts of the state. There's been some drought impacts. If you think about the water levels in the Mississippi and how that's impacting trade and how that's impacting kind of moving all of the crops that are being grown, All of those things are happening, so there's stuff that we can see. So it's not a super abstract concept around some of the climate impacts. So that's where there's the opportunity to, look for solutions from a technology standpoint, we may touch on that a bit more, but also looking for practical on-the-ground solutions that can be adopted that can help, the land be more resilient as well with some of these different weather extremes, from, working with where they work, things like cover crops or different tillage practices that can help with kind of the water management or the water infiltration, or giving your fields a bit more kind of capacity to withstand some of those extremes that we see more and more frequently.
Well, that makes sense, because as we make healthier soils,
They can
the
do a lot
soils
more. Yep,
have more water capacity.
exactly.
So,
Yep.
great. So Ty, what are those global production challenges that are affecting Cargill, and how do we get to that more resilient food system, and how do we handle those challenges? Similar question to what I asked Liz.
Yeah, I think as the climate is changing, our food system has to change too, and adapt to what we're starting to see globally. And so some of the challenges that you mentioned, we're definitely seeing in the upper Midwest, but we're starting to see that more frequently in other regions too, especially regions where we might be seeing new extreme weather events that we had maybe seen once every 100 years is now happening much more frequently. And so as we think about resiliency, we start to think about how we can couple that resiliency with the sustainability programs and partnerships that we're starting to build. And so regenerative agriculture is a key mechanism that we think could really help not only improve sustainability, but make our overall food system much more resilient. And so similar to increasing the water capacity in soil, we think there's also an opportunity to increase the carbon capacity in the soil as well. And over time, we think that will not only help us be able to address some of the challenges with climate change, but increase that resiliency to those extreme weather events too.
So as a farmer working with soils, and I've had 2021 and 2023 were both drought years, just really difficult. In between 2022, we had a tornado in my one hometown and a tornado in the other hometown, just wiping out mature forests, houses, elevators. Yet I'm seeing that within our crops, the healthier soils are the soils that still do well. And the soils that don't have the capacity to hold water, that's an issue. So we do need to work together to improve our soil productivity through new soil practices. So
I think so. I would just add that I think one of the challenges that we're really seeing is what works on your farm or on one specific field might not work for another one. And so how do you translate some of those conservation practices and regenerative agriculture practices in a way that's relevant to farmers and help support that adoption so that they can see the resiliency over time?
And I think you just telling the audience that you're doing those things is a great way to have peer-to-peer learning for what worked for you, what were your challenges up front, how did you overcome them, and what are some maybe tips and tricks that others can consider too. So you just help the whole audience.
So we're doing cover crops on our farm, and we're doing cereal rye because, well, we have a lot of dairy cattle. And so if we choose to in the spring, we can use that as a forage and then turn around and plant another crop. But like this fall, we got our rye in on time, and we have a green cover across our landscape, and it's live, and the deer love it, by the way, too. So it's all good. Switching gears, Liz, what demand trends in consumer packaged goods preferences are influencing crop production both here and across the globe? And are these shifts taking place in the crops grown or in specific traits used in crops driven by consumers? And that might be for you, Liz, too, but we'll start with you.
Great.
Ty.
Yeah, I think what we've been really excited to see is that consumer and customer demand around sustainability continues to increase. And what we've seen is that consumers are starting to better understand the food system. They're also much more interested in being able to support sustainable food products On top of that, our customers really feel the need to be able to accelerate sustainability progress as well. A lot of our customers have made big sustainability commitments. They also see a lot of the volatility and the need to be resilient across their supply chains, even though they sit on a different end than we sit. And so they view that as a key mechanism to be able to help support their supply chains as well. And so we see a lot of customers starting to invest in sustainability, and we think, given where Cargill sits in the supply chain, we have such an opportunity to be able to connect customers and their consumers to farmers and in different origin regions around the sustainability programs and support that's needed to drive the change that we want to see.
Liz?
Yeah, I think maybe the piece that I would take from that, from a consumer to CPG with farmers part of that whole chain is, and I just read this study the other day, but it was really well done, and it was the perceptions of consumers on agriculture and the perceptions that farmers have on agriculture and how they're farming. And when you look at that, there's these vast kind of divides between perception from both parties. So what I would say is there's almost a call to action for folks in the room who are within the farming community, which is everybody in this room, is to start telling that story more so we can start to make that gap smaller. So the story of agriculture is told to consumers so they understand kind of the modernization of agriculture, kind of where farmers are leading in productivity and the decisions that they're making and the love for the land and the soil health and everything. So there's an opportunity with the demands that are coming, but also some of the misconceptions or misperceptions around what agriculture is. So we have a big opportunity there to tell that story more any chance you get.
That's great. Are farmers meeting the demands that the consumers are putting on us? Are we matching up well there? Just a general follow-up there.
Yeah, I think this goes back to some of our earlier conversation around there's these huge, complex, sometimes abstract goals that customers and food companies have made, and how does that really translate on farm in very specific and field-level changes? And so I think part of what Cargill's really been trying to drive is to build that connection between the two so that the demand that customers have is met in a way that's practical and scalable at the farm level. And so a couple things that we've really been working on is building farmer-facing programs that help support the barriers that farmers face when making changes on their farm, adopting different conservation practices, and then Cargill can play the connector piece in the middle to help make that translation and bridge those practices and outcomes and share that with customers so that the full supply chain can come together. But I think there's definitely challenges between the demand and sometimes the perceived demand and what supply can deliver and what's actually feasible on farm.
That sounds really complicated. It's amazing that we have the food systems that we do in this country, in the world, that can pull that off. And I do believe that in this country we're capable of doing that.
I think so. I think it's an exciting time to be in this field because of that. I think there's such an opportunity that agriculture can be a huge part of this solution and really drive the change that customers and consumers are asking for, even if there is a lot of complexity in the middle and there's, I think, sometimes a misconception or a lack of understanding along the supply chain. I still think there's such a big opportunity there.
So Ty, what regenerative or sustainable ag practices are being utilized here in Minnesota and across the country? And how do they benefit the farmer, first of all, the end consumers, and then also the environment?
Yeah, so I think the programs that we build and sustainability doesn't work unless it's meeting all of those different needs. And I think there's lots of really good examples that are happening. I'll just focus on one. Cargill developed a program called Regen Connect, where we work with different farmers in Minnesota as well as other states to help support their adoption of different conservation practices. And so we really look at helping to address the three main barriers that farmers face when looking to add new practices or change their practices on farm. So the first one is the financial barrier that farmers can face. Adopting new practices can increase risk as well as increase costs on farm. And so we develop programs that help support and overcome the financial risks that they take on. The second barrier is more around technical expertise and the need for technical support when driving that type of change. And so Cargill has their own agronomists that support the program so that they can provide ongoing support throughout the growing season to adopt these practices. And the third one is a more social barrier. And so Cargill tries to develop different social support mechanisms like field days or connecting farmers to other farmers so that they could really learn from each other and help drive that change in their own community as well. And so we think that's been a really good way to help farmers adopt conservation practices, knowing that each field and each farm can be really different. And over time, we've seen that that increases their resiliency. It can increase the overall viability of their farm. And then for Cargill and customers, it helps to be able to drive that resiliency throughout the entire supply chain. And then from the environmental perspective, we're able to measure and quantify the carbon that gets sequestered because of these practices, or carbon that gets reduced if we're looking more at fertilizer optimization, and then the water benefits that we talked about earlier as well, being able to reduce runoff or be able to better support water infiltration into the soil and increase the water holding capacity. And so we think that these benefits will continue over time, and we're hoping that the longer we can have these practices in place and start to layer on additional conservation practices, that those benefits will just continue to multiply.
Thank you. Liz, what are you seeing from your viewpoint at Syngenta on practice adaptation and how it filters through the whole system?
Yeah, and I think one thing that Ty was saying is what we emphasize as well around the regenerative agriculture. It's not just the practices, it's what are the outcomes and what are the beneficial outcomes that come for the environment, for biodiversity, for water, and for the farmer as well, making sure that all of this ends in a profitable and productive system as well. And focusing on what are the things that you can do in your operation, because again, not everybody is the same, but making sure there's some basic principles that are followed as we're looking at regenerative agriculture. And some of the things that you mentioned, but there's also a lot of things that are already happening on farm, and it's how can you build more of those? Things like crop rotation, like you're talking about having rye within your system as well. Or precision application of inputs is a really important component. The cover crop piece of it, so minimal tillage or minimum disturbance. So all of those components together are the great practices, but it's really looking at what outcomes do we want to achieve that can benefit everyone across that value chain and across society, I think is where our focus is, and helping to as well help farmers understand where are they on that journey so they know what's that next step that they can take. So we do a lot of work with farmers to help them just assess, where am I at? And what's one thing I can do to get better?
So as we look at adaptation, what has been the best way to sell to farmers to make the new adaptations, to adopt the new practices? Where's been the most success that you've seen as you've worked with farmers? Ty?
Yeah, so we've spent many years just doing small-scale pilots and trying to figure out how can you really scale and support the adoption of some of these practices that we mentioned. And I think a couple things have really stood out as learnings from those pilots that we ultimately built into our Region Connect program. And I think one is to make it as easy as possible for farmers. I mean, farmers, have a million other things that they're working on. And if we create a program that is overly burdensome or is very reporting heavy, that just creates unnecessary burdens or barriers to joining a program. And so we try really hard to make our sustainability programs, our regenerative agriculture programs, easy for farmers to sign up and really focus on the outcomes that we want to see and less on the paperwork and the documentation that needs to happen. Those are pieces that Cargill can take on, and there's a lot of exciting new technology that can streamline that and make it a lot easier. We recently partnered with John Deere as a way to automate some of that data collection pieces, but that's been a really, I think, impactful design principle that we had building the program so that farmers can really focus on making the decisions that they need to make and focus on their farm instead of the back end of a lot of the programs that we have. And so that's been a really big learning for us that we've built into our programs. I think the other piece is really financially supporting farmers. In the end, the changes that we want to see have to work at a farm level, and the additional costs and risks that farmers take on needs to be supported throughout the food system. And so we really look at making sure that the right financial incentives are in place so that farmers are compensated for the work that they're doing on behalf of the entire food system.
I love the paperwork side of that. If you'd see my desk in my farm office, it's like I don't need more paperwork.
No,
So,
exactly.
Liz, what are you seeing? Syngenta?
I see where there's most success where you can meet folks where they're at and not where you're at. So finding out, helping, and we do a lot of this, with our digital team as well, is helping farmers, kind of self-assess. Where are they on this whole spectrum of sustainability? We have a lot of talk about carbon, and that's great, but there's a whole spectrum of sustainability that sometimes isn't talked about as much because it's not as pretty as carbon is right now. But we want farmers to be able to kind of self-assess where they are and then help them identify what are the things that I am doing well, because everybody's doing really great things, and then help them identify where is there an opportunity for improvement that's achievable on their operation. And it may be things, it may be record keeping, maybe changing how you're keeping records would help with improvement of understanding ROI and things like that. Maybe it's looking at biodiversity habitat and how can you incorporate that. Maybe it's community engagement as well. All of those are sustainability components that everybody can act on. So understanding where you are and what opportunities exist for you, and then moving forward from there, rather than overwhelming with do this and then do all these records and do all, that's not necessary. Everybody can move from where they are.
Liz, the question for you is what amazing crop and soil technology is within our grasp that will change agriculture and our food system? Through science, are we about to witness the next Norman Borlaug type breakthrough? Is it nitrogen-fixing corn, or is it a significant change in our methods of producing food? What secrets do you know that you are willing to share that the audience will take away? Wow, that's really cool. I never imagined that.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I have any super secrets, so spoiler alert, those will not be shared. But what I can say, so my background prior to working in sustainability, I worked in plant breeding for close to 20 years. Granted, it was in flowers, so when you walk around your yard, that's what I worked on. But I think there's such an opportunity within hybrid production, within trait development, that can help us adapt to the changes that we're seeing kind of with the environment. So a couple of examples of those. One is a trait that Syngenta has, which is our artesian hybrids, which that's a trait within corn that helps corn be more resilient under drought conditions. It's not a drought tolerance, but it helps to maintain yields or kind of buffer that impact from drought. So looking for more traits like that, that can help. There was a comment made on the previous discussion around food waste, and there was that giant gap of how much food actually goes to waste. So how can we create vegetables, for example, that have reduced food waste, right? Whether that's better post-harvest management, whether that's more edible parts, like more edible parts of cauliflower, for those of you who are into cauliflower. You know, how can you increase that? So I think there's just this whole sea of opportunity within plant breeding to look at some of those technologies. How can you make more nitrogen use efficient plants? How can you help them, you know, have stronger root systems that can help to kind of optimize all of those nutrients? Or how can you have stronger root systems that then remain in the ground that help to kind of build that resiliency in the soil? So I think plant breeding is a huge opportunity and still so much to learn in that space.
So I can relate because I do plant Syngenta hybrids, and I keep coming back, and there's some amazing new sweet corn that's just phenomenal. And I've been amazed as a farmer. In my career, we have doubled the yield of corn.
Yep.
And we're still improving on that and working through, you know, the changes that we see, drought resistance and all of that, insect resistance. It's just amazing. So, Ty, from a Cargill perspective, what are you seeing as new technologies and breakthroughs that are impacting production, but also within the food chain and distribution system that Cargill has? And I'm thinking about, I just read about these ships with sails, and I don't think that they're clippers, you know, like back from the 1800s, but just what are some of the cool things that Cargill is looking at and throughout the food system from farm to plate?
So I think there's tons of exciting innovation happening in this space, which is really exciting to see. I think where Cargill sits in the supply chain and playing more of a connector role, we're starting to really look at, are there ways that we can adjust our shipping and our transportation, like our winged ocean vessels, that really help us be able to harness wind power to reduce our environmental footprint as we're transporting goods around the world. I think other pieces that we're really excited about is really around satellite monitoring and just having better data, and not just data, because I think we're all inundated by data all the time, but better insights because of data at a much quicker and accurate pace so that we can make decisions much faster and much more efficiently around different sustainability programs, around how we're navigating our supply chains. And as we think about the changing climate, we're going to have to be much more agile, and we're going to have to adjust our food systems globally, and how our supply chains look today are going to look very differently in the future. And so while there's challenges to that, I think the technology piece of it is also really exciting because it's going to enable us to be able to make those decisions much faster and I think much better across the supply chain.
So this is a question for both of you. What part of our sustainability and resilient food system quest are you most excited about? Liz?
I mean, the whole possibility.
This is a pop quiz here.
Yeah. This was not in our notes. No, I think honestly, like the whole potential that we have from a technology standpoint to help improve productivity on your farm, like you were mentioning with the yields and everything, but to also think globally and how can we bring some of these technologies to developing countries so they can increase their productivity and kind of self-reliance as well on food production. And you know, that might be in commodity crops, but it also might be in vegetable production for farmers who need that kind of local supply. And that's one thing that I'm personally passionate about, is helping some of those smallholder farmers who are producing just for their own families, right? And how can we get technologies, how can we get hybrids to them that can help them be more productive with what they're doing on their farm? So I think it's really around technology gets me excited, plant breeding gets me excited, and I think there's so much stuff to do there and so much still to learn and so many more tools in our toolbox when it comes to breeding than maybe what we had 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and most certainly beyond that. So that I can get pretty geeked out about the plant breeding piece of it,
That's
as
good.
you can tell.
Yes. And I love the tools in the toolbox, because that's what I tell people. Let's not take out tools, and we need to add tools to the toolbox and then use the best ones to grow our food.
Yep, absolutely.
Ty, what makes you excited?
I feel like I've already said how excited I am a couple times, so I will try to keep my answer concise. But I think just the fact that sustainability isn't this small, nice to have, niche, off to the side activity anymore. I've worked in sustainability for over 10 years now, and I think it really started as, is this a trend? Is this like a small organic thing? And now I think how we think about sustainability has really evolved into this all-encompassing activity that touches every node of the supply chain. And I think that level of awareness is really exciting in general. From when I first visited your farm and we were just starting to think about dairy sustainability to today, I think that's a really exciting development. I think in terms of tools in the toolbox, there's tons of exciting innovations that are happening. I've been geeking out a lot about soil health and soil microbes, and I think how little we know about soil has been really eye-opening to me, but there's so much potential there, even in the biological space, and couple that with the different practices we can implement. But I think there's a ton of opportunity as we think about soil health and better understand our soil organisms, that it could be a huge tool in our toolbox.
So I think about the few years back when you came to my farm.
Yeah.
And the number of practices that
Exactly.
I have adapted since then, and that what others across the country have learned and have started to adapt.
Yeah.
It's taking off.
Yeah, it's like a hockey stick. It's not a linear.
You know, I have pollinator habitat, I have cover crops, and I'm starting to think about things that I never thought about before. Yeah. And, you know, the window and the door always needs to be open to new ideas and new thoughts and new practices. So, given our kickoff speaker, Jacob Shapiro's remarks, and we missed the last few of those because we were backstage, the amazing opportunities that we have in ag and food to provide, adapt, be resilient, solve our food, energy, and climate security problems, what's your 1-minute elevator pitch to someone or a group of talented people that you'd like to get into agriculture? What's your selling point to get people to join us in our producing food efforts? Liz?
Well, I'm going to do a preamble to my 1-minute elevator speech, though. And I'm going to use examples. So I have a son who is in high school, and I always go to their back to school night for parents where we can learn about all the things that they're doing and stuff. And I always go to the counselors and I say, I work in agriculture. I would love to come and talk at a career day. And the response is, I live in Colorado Springs, so I'm in a city. Well, we don't have an agriculture program. And I'm like, but you have English, you have math, you have engineering, you have biology, you have chemistry, you have, food and sciences. I'm like, you have agriculture in every single one of those topics. And that's what agriculture needs. We need people from all different disciplines to come in and solve big challenges, to help us communicate, to help us look for new technologies. So agriculture touches every subject in that school. And that's what I want. That's the message that I want to give when I go there is, doesn't matter what you want to study, you can apply that somewhere in agriculture.
Ty?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I I think another common misconception is that if you want to work in agriculture, you have to have a farm background or you have to grow up in the agriculture community. And I grew up in the city, I didn't have any farm experience, and that was also a bit of my apprehension in wanting to work in agriculture too, is I felt like you needed that background to be able to succeed in this industry. And I think that's so far from being true. And to your point, you need people of all different backgrounds because agriculture isn't this narrowly defined career path that I think a lot of people think. And as we think about where innovation and where investments are going to go in the future, agriculture and the food system is a huge growth opportunity. And you want to be in the exciting, growing segments of the industry, and agriculture is one of them.
So my next question deals with negative opinion. And I have a story here. and Don Wick in the audience will love this one. So this is many years ago, but I was on a flight going to Grand Forks, North Dakota, of all places. It was a beautiful August evening. The sun was getting low in the horizon, and as the plane is settling down over the Red River Valley, the engines start to cut back, and the cabin got quiet, and all of a sudden, a voice from behind me said, "Oh, it's so boring out the window. There's just nothing to see out there. I can't imagine why anyone would want to be here." And as a farmer, I heard that, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I missed my opportunity for a response. It wasn't a one-on-one situation. But I thought, if I could have put my best James Earl Jones voice out and said to everyone in the cabin that beneath you lies some of the most fertile cropland, the most fertile land in North America, your wheat, your sugar beets, your corn, your barley, sunflowers, your food. A major source of your food is out that window. To me, it's one of the most beautiful things that I could see, and you're missing the opportunity to see the beauty in what's out the window. So my question to the two of you is, what would your pitch be to the person that's sitting next to you on the plane? And think of it in modern terms as to what farmers are doing with sustainability in our food system and how marvelous it is. What would your pitch be, Ty?
I think there's tons of facts that you could share about how productive our food system is, how agriculture can really be a solution to addressing sustainability issues. But I think what's missing a bit is more of the emotional side. And I think a big message is that we care. Farmers care about their resources. They care about the food that they're producing. Companies like Cargill care. Big CPG companies care. But I think every node of the supply chain really cares about doing the right thing and driving sustainability forward. And I think that kind of emotional message and emotional understanding is a bit missing in some of these more polarizing conversations.
Liz?
So I have a question. I'm on this plane and they're sitting next to me. Are they using my armrest or not? This might influence how I respond.
It's probably a 300-pound guy. Yeah.
Okay. So I think for me, though, it's the same thing. It's the emotion of it. It's, I grew up in a farming community in eastern Iowa. My dad would drop us off to work on the neighbor's farm all day when he went to work, because we would be under someone's watchful eye throughout the day.
Daycare.
He called it summer camp, but I don't think that was the same thing. Yeah. But just getting to know a farmer and being able to take it back to, I've talked to farmers. I've talked to Pat and all of the things that he's doing on his operation, and that they really do care. This is for their families. This is for the land that they own and have been owned for generations. And we're all the same, right? We all care about, our families and having a legacy, and that's no different from farmers. So if you get that opportunity to talk to a farmer, or if they're using my armrest, I'm like, do you want me to get one for you to talk to? But absolutely taking it back to that emotional level and get to know a farmer, because I've yet to meet a farmer who doesn't want to share their story.
So we have a question that's been put up forward on the monitor here to our panelists. You touched on the role of crop diversity as a strategy for sustainability, meeting consumer demand, and farmer profitability. Can you expand on that? And how do we encourage more farmers to diversify their crop intentions?
So I think this is going to have to be a joint answer, because I think there's a couple of components to that. You know, one is looking at rotation, which a lot of farmers do, and then there's some simple rotations that can be added, or there's the inclusion of things like rye to increase that diversity on that acre. But I also think that there's an opportunity, you know, with what Cargill does and all the CPGs and stuff, is to help, you know, create some of that demand for some of those diverse crops. And that's not going to be done tomorrow, but I think that there's that opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think if we can create the market and create the market at the scale that we need in our food system, that would help connect what we were talking about earlier with the customer and consumer demand to the types of practices that you want to see on farm. And so I absolutely agree with you. I think there's definitely things we can do on farm to help support that, but there's also the broader supply chain and the market demand that needs to come together as well.
Do we have any more questions? No. Okay.
Sorry to be the bad guy.
Tamara, I get a couple more minutes. Just hold on. I was her first boss at AgriGrowth, so she needs to listen up. So to close out here, Liz and Ty, I'd like you to make some closing comments on the topic at hand here, and just your perspectives and something that you want our audience, you know, a message to go home with. So Ty, I'll let you go first.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm honored to be able to share a bit of our perspective today. And I think often when we talk about sustainability and some of the climate change challenges that we see, it can be negative and a bit overwhelming when you think about the scale of the challenges. But I would just encourage us to think about the opportunity on the flip side of that. And I really think, given the types of programs and partnerships and innovation that we're seeing, that agriculture is how we're going to meet those challenges, and it's an exciting and innovative space to be able to work in.
For me as well, I'm grateful to be part of this panel, and I'm grateful to see kind of the breadth of folks who are in the audience, although I can't really see everybody. But I'm really grateful to have so many folks interested and listening to a topic on sustainability. But one of my key messages that I always have, sustainability can be really overwhelming. It's you've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. And it's kind of like New Year's resolutions. If you're going to pick like 5 things, you're not going to do any of them, right? Because it's really hard. So when you think about sustainability, break it down to what's one thing that you can do, that you could do as a farmer, that you could do as a consumer, that you could do, you know, within policy or within a CPG company. Everybody has one thing that they can do. So what's that one thing that you can do? And try that. And then the next thing is easier once you've done one thing and taken that first step.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an honor to be your moderator this morning. And we want to thank Cargill for sponsoring this session. And again, thanks to you. And please give a round of applause to our 2 panelists here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome job, and thank you, Pat, and really appreciate that discussion. And again, our speakers will be around for a little bit, as will Pat. I know you learned a lot from that.